Hey there, I'm Judah Vitale, functional nutritionist, lifestyle coach, and heart math mentor. And this is the 6th video in a series that I'm presenting for you on adrenal function, cortisol disruptions, and the effects of long-term chronic stress. So in our last video, we turned the corner from physiology and the effects of adrenal imbalance and chronic stress and long-term elevated cortisol into solutions. And we discussed the various lifestyle modifications that anyone who's dealing with any kind of adrenal imbalance can implement in their life. And in this video today, what I want to talk with you about is the dietary principles that you can incorporate into your life that are going to help bring healing into your adrenals and help regulate your cortisol levels. So these are general guidelines. Once again, in my opinion, as a functional nutritionist, there's really only one right diet, and that's the diet that's right for you. So what I'm going to lay out today are just general principles that I have found in my experience to work for most people dealing with adrenal imbalance. And so the first of these is things to eliminate, and that would be caffeine, alcohol, and sugar. Those three right there. Every time you have a sip of caffeine, what that does is it stimulates the adrenals to secrete cortisol, and your cortisol levels will go up. If your adrenal glands are fatigued and having a really hard time producing cortisol, this fatigues them even further. So no cortisol or no caffeine, especially if you have no cortisol. If you have low cortisol, no caffeine. Also, no sugar, because sugar is a stress in our physiology, especially refined processed white sugar. But sugar in general is going to be a stressor on the adrenal glands. Alcohol, the same. So we want to eliminate caffeine, sugar, and alcohol as much as possible. This can be really difficult, especially if you've been hooked on caffeine for a long period of time. So you really have to come up with some strategies to help wean you off of the caffeine or the sugar. And sugar, as we're beginning to find out, is a highly addictive substance, considerably more addictive than things like cocaine or heroin. And most of us, it's been from the time we were little kids, we've been consuming high amounts of sugar or refined processed carbohydrates. So when you start to eliminate these things, it can be a little difficult. Another thing that you really want to eliminate is refined and processed foods. So things like pastries, breads, cereals, pasta, white rice, these types of foods that break down into glucose rapidly. Because one of the key things about restoring adrenal balance is blood sugar regulation. So blood sugar rises and falls based on how we eat. When we eat carbohydrates and starches and proteins, what will happen is starches and carbohydrates, for the most part, are going to break down. They're all going to break down into glucose, blood sugar, some faster than others. And what will happen is some people who are on the standard American diet, who are eating refined processed foods, what happens is their blood sugar rises rapidly. It'll go from baseline to a peak within about an hour, and then in an hour later after that it will crash. So you're riding this blood sugar roller coaster, this really rapid high with this really rapid low. And when you're spiking and crashing your blood sugar like that, what that begins to do is put a stress on your physiology, and it affects your adrenal function. Because as we talked about in previous videos, cortisol and adrenals are directly connected to blood sugar regulation. So when you spike and crash your blood sugar, what normally happens on the crash is you get a reactive hypoglycemic event. And that means that your blood sugar has gone below baseline levels, it's gotten low, and that stimulates the adrenals to kick out cortisol, which is going to go to the liver and stimulate the liver to release glucose into the bloodstream to bring the glucose back up. So when you're riding a blood sugar roller coaster, a really rapid high with a really rapid crash, that stimulates stress in the adrenals. It stimulates more cortisol release. We don't want that. What we want you to be on is the kiddie roller coaster, or what I like to call the lazy river. So when you eat, after you eat, you should have a slow, gradual rise of glucose that goes up for about 2 to 3 hours, and at about hour 3, it gradually begins to come back down again. And in about 4 hours or so, it's time to eat again. So we want a slow rise with a slow dip. And in the grandest scheme of things, when you eat, you really don't want to notice any difference in your energy levels at all. You don't want to go from lacking energy to high energy. You just want to notice stable energy throughout the day. That's the sweet spot. Okay, so keeping your blood sugar stable is one of the first things that, as far as dietary principles of putting a diet together, that you can do. Eating low glycemic carbohydrates, focusing on higher fat, higher protein breakfasts is really important. This sets the tone for the day. This sets the tone for your blood sugar throughout the day. Fat is the molecule of satiety, or our feeling of satisfaction. So when we get adequate amounts of fat, when we get higher fat meals, that leaves us feeling full and satisfied, not feeling full, physically full, but still craving something. So if you don't get enough fat in your diet, what the after effect of that might be is that you feel physically full, but still craving something. So I like to steer people towards a higher protein, higher fat breakfast to set the tone for your blood sugar for the day. And it leaves you feeling full and satisfied till lunch. 3 meals a day I find to be optimal. That's what I really like to steer people towards, because it helps with our leptin levels, it helps with energy regulation. You don't want to be releasing too much cortisol or insulin into your bloodstream throughout the day. So eating 3 square meals a day I find to be optimal. And now, as far as different diets that I recommend, there's 2 in particular that I like to use with the people that I work with, and that is paleo and the ketogenic diet. And the thing that I like about these diets is that, one, they're both grain and bean and legume free. Okay, and I find that grains and beans and legumes are 2 categories of foods that people tend to have difficulty digesting. And they can spike the blood sugar, and they're inflammatory, they're difficult to digest. And so I like to take the grains and the beans and legumes out. And what I find when I do that with most people is that their inflammation goes down, pain, various aches and pains start to go away, and most importantly, their energy levels begin to stabilize. They have less highs and lows in their energy. So as far as a difference in them is that the ketogenic diet is really focused on fat as its main energy source. Upwards of 70 to 80% of your calories in the ketogenic diet will come from fat. Whereas with the paleo diet, it's not so focused on how many carbs or how much fat, so it's more lenient than that. And in the ketogenic diet, you're allowed to have dairy products in the ketogenic diet, whereas in the paleo, it's basically grain and bean and legume free, dairy free, sugar free, processed food free, right? Ketogenic diet, grain free, bean and legume free, processed food free, sugar free, but it allows dairy products. But you can do it without dairy. It's not a big deal there. If dairy doesn't agree with you, you don't have to have dairy doing the ketogenic diet. So the reason why I really like to work with, another reason why I like to work with these diets, and especially when I have people doing paleo, I tell them to do a paleo diet with higher fat. And the fat is really good, one, for satiety, as I've already mentioned. It's a dense energy source. It's a dense, long-lasting energy source that doesn't require insulin for its use at the cellular level. And every time you eat carbohydrates, your pancreas is stimulated to secrete insulin into the bloodstream. One of the things, as I mentioned in the previous videos, that happens when you have long-term elevated cortisol is you begin to become insulin resistant. So if that's the case for you, if you're getting insulin resistance, if you eat a meal and you crash right afterwards, you get sleepy after every meal you eat, that's a sure sign of insulin resistance. And insulin resistance is going to lead to prediabetes and eventually diabetes. And so what I like to do is begin minimizing the amount of carbohydrates, increasing the amount of fat, so we can reset the insulin sensitivity for your cells. Because what happens is elevated cortisol is going to impair insulin's ability to deliver glucose to your cells. So when you eat starches, when you eat carbohydrates, and they break down into glucose, and glucose rises in your bloodstream, your pancreas perceives this, and it secretes insulin. But when you get this spike of blood sugar, really rapid rise of blood sugar, the pancreas reacts rather than responds, and it surges insulin into the bloodstream. So it floods the system with insulin, and insulin's like the chaperone. Insulin finds glucose in the bloodstream and says, "Hey, glucose, I know exactly where you need to go." It takes it in its arm, it knocks on the cell wall of the cell, it says, "Hey cell, I've got glucose for you." And the cell's gonna be like, "All right, come on in." But when you have lots of excess glucose and excess insulin from an insulin surge, and that is just circulating around in the bloodstream, what happens is, it's kind of like the boy who cries wolf story. The insulin keeps triggering the receptor site for insulin in your cells, but your cell is full of glucose and it doesn't need it anymore. And it begins to become deaf to the insulin. And it's like, insulin, I've heard from you enough. I told you I don't need you. I'm just going to start shutting down to you. And it doesn't respond so much to the insulin anymore. So you begin to get insulin resistance at the cellular level. Well, when you increase your fat and decrease your carbohydrates and train your cells to burn fat as an energy source instead of glucose, what that does is it begins to allow your cells to become resensitized to insulin. And that's why I like to work with higher fat diets for people who might have elevated cortisol, insulin resistance, and then you can begin to slowly incorporate more carbs back into the diet. So I really recommend a variety of fats and oils in these diets, things like coconut oil, coconut butter, cocoa butter, ghee is a particular favorite of mine, avocado oil, extra virgin olive oil, animal fats like pork lard, duck fat, beef tallow. These are all really healthy fats and oils to bring into your diet. The oils that I recommend people stay away from are your industrial seed oils like cottonseed, corn oil, soybean oil, canola oil. Really keep those out of the diet. Focus on the fats that I just mentioned, and what begins to happen is you're really nourishing your physiology, but also the nervous system. Fat calms the nervous system down. So having a higher fat, lower carbohydrate diet is really good to bring calming experience into your nervous system. All right, so what would a meal typically look like? Well, as a baseline level to begin from, what I normally tell people is 50% of your plate in vegetables. And that can be raw in the form of a salad, cooked, sauteed, a little bit of fermented vegetables to help restore the microbiome. If you want to know more about the microbiome, I have videos on that and you can check out. But so 50% of your plate in vegetables, about a deck of cards or a palm-sized portion of protein, palm excluding the fingers, about the size of your palm, size and thickness of your palm, portion of protein like organic free-range chicken, grass-fed and finished beef, wild-caught fish, lamb, these types of things. Free-range organic eggs. If you're vegetarian, gets a little more tricky there. Organic tempeh is a good protein source. I tend to steer people away from tofu and most soy products. I'm not a fan of them. Talk about that in something else. This isn't the time or place for that. But and then adding in the fats. So avocados, olives, drizzling olive oil or avocado oil or melted ghee on your vegetables. That way, about a tablespoon per meal is really good, and that's just going to ensure that you're getting the fat that you need in your diet. Now, I understand that this can be really difficult to achieve, right? So this is, like I said, that's kind of optimal, and it's a beginning place, it's a starter place. The important thing here is that you do your best, right? Practice makes permanent. You can work your way towards doing this. It's more important that you're not stressed about your meals than getting the meal perfect, right? So we don't want to increase your stress when you're trying to create a meal for yourself, okay? So do your best, do the best that you can. Basic principles: clean food, organic as much as possible, 50% vegetables, decacarbs or palm-sized portion of protein, added fats. You can have a little bit of fruit, 1 to 3 servings of low glycemic fruits a day. It's kind of nature's dessert, right? So blueberries, strawberries, cherries, pears, Granny Smith apples, stone fruits like nectarines, peaches, plums. Those are all really good fruits to have. And you only need 1 to 3 servings of that a day. And then the other thing that I want to mention as far as like preparing meals is that when we're stressed, we can feel really depleted. If we've got depressed cortisol levels, we can feel really tired, really depleted, and it can feel really challenging to prepare multiple meals within a single day. And if that is your case, then I highly recommend you batch cooking. So preparing ahead, like when you go to the store and you buy vegetables at the store, come home and chop what you need for the next few meals. Put them in glass containers, like Pyrex storage containers, and so have the veggies that you can chop and they'll stay well contained. They're not going to deteriorate too rapidly in the fridge. Prepare them ahead of time, and by doing that, it's going to make making meals easier. And then what you can do is batch cook. So take some time and make a few meals at once and put some in the freezer, put some leftovers in the fridge, and that way you have multiple meals ready to go, and you don't always have to make something new every single day, multiple times throughout the day. So we want to make this as easy on you as possible. So pre-chop your veggies, batch cook a few meals, and don't stress out too much. Do your best. We strive for progress, not perfection, right? 1% change every day over the long haul is going to make great change in general, right? So if you can make a 1 degree shift every day, in the long run, that's going to be a 180 degree turn, and you're going to be doing better. So these are just some real basic dietary guidelines that I'd like to cover for people, and anyone who's dealing with any kind of adrenal stress issues can incorporate these dietary principles into their everyday life. Now, in the next video, I'm going to go into supplementation, and this is where things begin to get more individualized. So we're going to start getting into different supplements you can use for different cortisol rhythm patterns, and then we're going to get a little more technical there. If you want to learn more about how to work with me or what I have to offer in general, go to the link below at judahveitel.com. If you have any comments, if this has stimulated anything for you, if it's been of benefit for you and you've had an aha moment, please share it below. If you have other tips that you would like to offer the community, please do. I'm really interested in creating dialogue here. This is for everybody's healing. We're all in this together. I really welcome your comments and encourage you to comment. And I want to thank you for watching this video. and I hope you have a nourishing day.